Before we get into today's episode, I have two things I have to say. First and foremost, if you are listening to this the day that this airs, happy AP Bio Exam Day for all of you AP Biology teachers out there. I know it is sometimes a doozy to have that first exam day of all of the exam days because you lose a week or two of potential in-class review time. But on the other hand, the positive is at least your students are hopefully preparing for your exam the most since it's the first one that they have. So I hope that goes well. I hope everyone labels their different parts of their FRQ responses and takes their time and really uses all of the data and the models and the graphs and the information they're given to answer the questions, and that you can take a deep breath after this because I know this is a big hurdle in your year and that maybe you can enjoy these last few remaining weeks of school now that this is behind you and your students. Everyone else, if you're listening, I'm assuming you're a teacher, so I have to say happy Teacher Appreciation Week. I hope that this week is just full of surprises and really good lunches and treats and nice cards from different students, maybe a few gifts or gift cards from their parents. And I just hope you feel incredibly appreciated because you're doing arguably the most important job in a child's life behind their parents, and really making an impact on students' lives that will affect them the rest of their lives. And sometimes we don't get to see the scope of our impact in the moment, but it's 4, 8, 10, 20 years down the road where the student comes back and says, hey, I remember that you did this, or you left this impression on me, or what this we did in your classroom at this time sparked this in my career, whatever it could be. So I hope you feel appreciated, not just today, but every day. And I hope you do get to see some of the fruit of the labor that you're doing in the lives of your students today and not just 20 years from now. So all that to say, I'm grateful for you guys and I appreciate you. And I hope today's episode equips you and helps you. We're going to talk about how to keep up with lesson planning. And this may seem like a silly topic for May when some of you are like, I'm not even lesson planning at this point. I'm just trying to get through the AP exam or get through my EOC or whatever. We're just trying to get to the end. Okay. I get it. But the tips I have to keep up with your lesson planning, actually, it's a lot of things we need to kind of front load. And so this is a great time to talk about this because it's some things that maybe you can consider as this year is winding down, maybe as you're proctoring some final exams and you have some kind of dead time. I know that may make some of you laugh or roll your eyes. You're like, there's never dead time. But maybe as things are slowing down this year, if you have students working on an independent project in the year, this is a little bit of some reflection and stuff like that you can do, or block out some time this summer to do. Because we're going to talk about how to keep up with lesson planning. And I have 6 tips for you. We'll talk about how to batch, overplan, have rhythms, pace, margin, and reflection. Okay, those are the 6 things. So without further ado, let's dive in.
This is Secondary Science Simplified, a podcast for secondary science teachers who want to engage their students and simplify their lives. I'm Rebecca Joyner from It's Not Rocket Science. As a high school science teacher turned curriculum writer, I am passionate about helping other science teachers love their jobs, serve their students, and do it all in only 40 hours a week. Are you ready to rock the time you spend in your classroom and actually have a life outside of it? You are in the right place, teacher friend. Let's get to today's episode.
This episode was inspired by a submission to my survey that I send out every year for the podcast, and a teacher said this: I'm thinking I'm organized, but somehow at the end of the week, I end up with a bunch of to-do list items. I think it might be because I'm shifting or last minute adding slides or instructions to plans, so I spend my prep time doing that. Or I have to revise my lesson plan because things took too long. I don't know. I would just love to hear how to make sure you get everything done during your prep time and keep up with your lesson plans. Okay, I thought this was such a relatable submission. I remember this feeling of getting to the end of the week and being like, why is there so much left to do, or having to move so many things around? And so these are 6 things that have majorly transformed my time when I was in the classroom full time. And I really hope that they serve you as well. So first, my number 1 recommendation is to batch plan all of your lesson plans, to plan your entire units. I feel really passionate about this for a couple of reasons. One, I just think it's the most effective way to holistically lesson plan and really consider what is the best way to sequence this content to engage my students in this, to scaffold, to build upon this as the unit goes on and this unit into the next. It's the best way to make sure that your units have themes that thread throughout if you're doing this all at once. It's the best way to make sure that your day-to-day lesson plans don't feel just pieced together and frantic. It's the best way to make sure you're not stuck at the copier at 7:15 every morning changing the toner when you got to print something out because you just figured it out last night and you're overwhelmed. And of course, you don't have the authority to change the toner. So you got to go find the lady in the front office who's the only one who does, or yada, yada, yada. It just takes, can you feel that? Like even my heart rate was going up talking about it. Like it just takes that pressure. It's like releasing the top of your Instapot and like letting all of the pressure out when you batch plan. Okay. And I understand this is hard because it takes a lot of time to do this. So there's really 3 ways you can look at this. One is you can see your lesson plans as things that you're writing from scratch. And yeah, that's essentially a full-time job. You're basically at that point, if you write all your lesson plans in every instructional resource you do and stuff from scratch, at that point, you're a curriculum designer. And that's my job. Okay. So yeah, that takes an insane amount of time. The second way you can view your role in lesson planning is to be like a curriculum curator. And that is something that takes way less time. It takes like a fifth of the amount of time to say, okay, let me look at my whole unit and let me make sure I have notes for each of these topics. And I have an engaging resource for each of these topics. And I have a reinforcing handout or practice for each of these topics. And you're curating in that you might be making some of that, but you're gathering things. You're hunting and gathering, if you will, from Facebook groups, from, other teachers in your department, in your district, from the shared drive, whatever. And you're kind of piecing it all together. That takes a lot less time. Now, the thing that takes 0 time, this is the third way you can approach lesson planning, is to completely outsource it. And that's where, I do come in. That's like what I do at It's Not Rocket Science is I am obsessed with batch lesson planning. I am obsessed with holistically looking at your units and making sure that they build upon each other in a sequence that makes sense. I'm obsessed with making sure that there's themes that weave throughout every unit so that there's continuity. I'm obsessed with making sure that there's consistency between units so that things don't feel scary or overwhelming to students, but they feel familiar when they come in your classroom and organized, while at the same time, making sure there's a lot of variety of instructional resources to ensure you are doing those inquiry labs. You're doing the wet labs, you're doing the dry, you're doing the creative activities, you're doing the research. Can we do it all every unit? No. But when we batch plan, we're able to make sure there's that diversity. There's so many different ways that students have opportunities to show what they know. There's so many different ways that students are going to get to engage within content and explore and extend upon it and expand and all of those things when we're looking at it all at once and doing it holistically as this massive project. Again, that's like truly where I get my energy. That's where I geek out. That's where I just fell in love with this. I realized when I started teaching that that's what I love doing the most. Engaging with the students for sure, but it was the batch planning and the vision casting and then the execution of that plan that made such a difference. So again, you can batch plan your units and there's 3 ways you can approach that. 1, you can do it all from scratch. That will take the most time. Okay. 2, you can be a hunter-gatherer, curriculum curator where you're piecing stuff together. Some stuff you make, some of others. That'll take about 20% of that time. Or you can spend 0% time on this and essentially outsource all of it to someone else, like It's Not Rocket Science. And if you're listening to this during Teacher Appreciation Week, it's almost always a TBT sale. You can save 25%. If that is happening this week, they don't tell us the dates till right before. And I batch everything. I batch record my podcast a few weeks early. Then there will be like an ad running that'll remind you that you can save. But that is something I highly recommend. And if outsourcing scares you, always just purchase 1 unit first and see how that feels to have that whole thing done, big picture, and then you can potentially go from there. But I highly recommend batch planning. That's going to take so much off your plate for when it comes to lesson planning and end of week to-do list items right off the top. Okay, the second thing I want to recommend is that in doing that, you need to overplan. I think it's so much easier to push things out another day than it is to kind of fill dead time because you didn't have enough. And then, okay, now I'm back to the drawing board on Wednesday night. Now I'm back to the drawing board on Thursday night. Now I'm back to the drawing board on Friday night. Like, just plan more than you think you can get done. And then you can always scoot things over in your week. And that is so much simple and requires like basically no effort. Okay, so I highly recommend that. Most of you are probably like, that's not a problem for me though. How do I actually get everything done? And that's where steps 3 and 4 come in. Number 3 is that rhythms and routines. You have got to create rhythms and routines within your class period. 1, for consistency's sake for your students, but 2, for your own productive pacing of the class period and making sure you're getting through things. So much time is wasted due to lack of rhythm and routine and transitions taking a really long time in the classroom. Your students actually thrive on routine. They have so much more anxiety, I feel like, than my generation did growing up because they have so many more outlets that are putting input into their brain. Like they are receiving information. They know so much more about the world because of their access than we ever did. And that amount of knowledge is so much for someone to bear that it just breeds anxiety, let alone all of the technology that's constantly, firing these neurological pathways in them. So one way that we can ease that is we can settle them down. We can give them stability, and that relieves worries and anxiety because they know what to expect in our class. It actually is something they really crave and they don't even realize because they don't know that it's really missing in other areas of their lives until they find it somewhere else, like in your classroom. So here's what I mean by this. Some of the rhythms and routines that I maintain that keep my class periods moving and my lesson plans functioning and happening and getting accomplished is we always start with a bell ringer every single day. It's an established routine. I train them. They walk in, they sit down, they do it. We wrap it up within 5 minutes. Now we're moving on. It's such a productive time. During that time, that's where they can turn in work or I'm going to spot check anything or anything like that. Then after the bell ringer, we're going to spend maybe another 5 minutes going over that, going over any homework or things from the previous day. And then we're going to look at the agenda on the board. I think putting an agenda on your board every single day, and I know a lot of people use a slide. I like to write it on the whiteboard so it's up the whole class period on the side of my room so that they can kind of see, okay, here's what we're doing. Especially too with the overplanning, then when they see how much is on the day's agenda, they know that there's not going to be time for lollygagging. And it keeps them and you on pace because everyone knows what to expect in the class period. Another rhythm or routine I trained my students in was always sitting and waiting for the bell to ring. In that last 2 minutes of the class period, I'll review any upcoming due dates. We'll talk about anything that needs to be talked about or emphasized. And if there's any extra time, I'll tell them, hey, tell me something good. That's something that I got from one of my teachers when I was in school. And it's an opportunity for them to share something that's going on in their life. Or you can say, tell me news of interest. Is there anything interesting? So it doesn't have to be something good. And it's an opportunity to connect with your students too. These routines help them and they help me so much. I start them from the very first day of school and I drill them into it. Same with labs. I have routines and rhythms for lab days that I drill into them. And these are the ways that we save time in class because there's always the same kind of pace in my class of we're moving from this, we're moving to this. You don't know what's happening next. You can look at the agenda. It's always in the same place on the board. So those are the kinds of things that I recommend when it comes to rhythms and routine. It's going to create some consistency and you're going to shave off time that's being wasted in all these different places when you have that consistency. And you're not going to have to be answering questions like, what are we doing today that are such waste of time? Or where do I turn this in? Or when do I turn this in? Because you're training them in all of those procedures. So that's going to save some valuable time. My fourth recommendation, it has to do with pace. You have to remember, y'all, that you're the teacher, thus you're in charge. You set the pace. And I get it's hard to remember this because they are young adults and they can have really strong personalities and they can bulldoze you. And there's a lot more of them than there are of you. I get it. I also get you might feel young in spirit. I know I feel that way. I remember being at Disney World with my children in February and my husband and being on the Disney app and managing the lightning lanes. And it was like a part-time job. And I just remember thinking, I wish there was another adult here. I wish I wasn't the one in charge and I could just sit back and be a kid and just show up to each of the rides and tap my lightning lane and just enjoy my life. But I'm the one who's pre-ordering meals and signing up for the next lightning lane as soon as one is released or whatever. But here's the thing, y'all. We are in charge, okay? So we have to remember that we can control the pace of our classrooms. It's so easy to send students off to work in small groups or independent work in with your neighbor or go off and do this lab. And then we get caught up grading something, checking email, which I don't recommend during class. That's another conversation for another day. maybe answering questions. And before we know it, it's been 30 minutes and we don't have any class data recorded and no supplies are cleaned up. And it's just like so overwhelming. Okay, so we cannot let that happen. You have to remember that you are in charge and you run the show. It is up to you to maintain the pace for your students. Your students, their natural default as teenagers is not a state of being productive and efficient. It's a state of like apathy and inefficiency. So it's our job to keep them moving. Now, I know that I'm a very type A, Enneagram 1 organized person telling you this. And so this can seem very hard for some of you that might be more type B, that might be more of a creative, that might struggle with ADHD. Let me tell you something. I set timers constantly. I set alarms constantly. My entire life is run by recurring alarms on my iPhone of, oh, stop what you're doing, go pick up this kid. Oh, stop what you're doing, go tuck this person in for bed. Stop what you're doing, make sure you take a shower if you plan on taking a shower today, because if not, there's not going to be another window. Like, there's no shame in using tools to help you with these things. And in your classroom especially, set the timers. Go ahead and set recurring alarms that'll go off at the last 5 minutes of class every single day to help you remember to wrap things up and move on. As soon as you send them off to work independently, set a timer. Always set it for less too than you've actually allotted. So if I've allotted like 15 minutes to work on something, I'll set the timer for 10 or 12. It'll go off and then I'll be like, do we need more time? And if I see that they're working productively, then I can give them that more margin. If not, we just start going over it and we move on. But you are in control of the pace. Now, you might be thinking, I have no idea how to predict the pace of like, how long will this activity take? How long will this lab? Even if you've purchased curriculum from someone else like me and I've given you pacing, your students may work at a totally different pace. That's okay. First, let me say that pacing gets easier over time. The more times you run a lab or an activity or you lecture through a certain concept, the more you're going to have appropriate expectations for what the pace of those things will be. So give yourself a lot of grace, especially if it's the first time you're doing anything or teaching something. Now, on the other side of this, I would say I would, again, lean to expecting things to go maybe a little faster. And then if they don't, you can always offer grace and extend time. But plan that so that you can keep them moving. And then that way, if the timer goes off and students are like, oh my gosh, I haven't even started, then that really kicks them into high gear. As opposed if you give them 40 minutes to do it and then the timer goes off and they haven't started, then it's like, what have we done for 40 minutes? So really keep on them with that. I think it makes a big difference. Now, of course, you will have students that can't keep up with the average pace. You know, average means average for a reason. So there will always be students who work faster and there will always be students that work a little slower. That's okay. Those fast finishers, I have a podcast episode I'll link for you that you can listen to. And those ones that work a little bit slower, or maybe they have an IEP, a 504, some sort of accommodation, you meet with them individually and say, hey, everyone's going off to do 10 practice problems. You just do the odds, okay? And then we'll circle back. Like you can accommodate for them. But in general, we need to keep the whole pace of the class moving. If you need more help with this also, episode 92 is about precise pacing and tight transitions, and I'll link that in the show notes that you can check out. Now, that's how we're kind of maintaining pace during class to make sure we're getting through our lesson plans as best we can. So how do we accommodate for when things run long or we have too many things on our to-do list and, you know, we have the best laid plans, but they just don't work out? How do we do that? That kind of goes back to the original asker's question for me. And that's where numbers 5 and 6 come in. 5 is margin. You need to have margin in your week for lesson plan adjustment and last minute to-dos. I personally think every planning period of your week should be planned out how it's going to be spent. Maybe Tuesdays and Thursdays are grading. Mondays are for making copies. Wednesdays are for lesson planning. And then Fridays planning period is for your catch-all day of all the little things that have added up throughout the week. But you got to use your planning time wisely. I think a lot of times teachers don't actually have a lesson planning problem. They have a grading problem, and they spend so much of their planning time in their prep period grading that then they don't have any time for lesson plan adjustment and things like that, or all the extra to-dos that come on your plate. So I highly recommend grading less and then making sure you're not going to plan on writing a lab or testing out a lab or grading tests during your Friday planning period. Your Friday planning period is going to be for all of the overflow. So build in that margin for yourself for your own week. That's something you can start right now for the rest of the school year and see how it goes. If you need more help with having a productive planning period, I'll link episode 62 in the show notes for you about that. And then the sixth and final tip I have is reflection. The best thing you can do is immediately reflect on a unit after it's over for future success. So print out your lesson plans for that whole unit and make notes on it. Like, oh, these lab stations took twice as long. I need to block off twice as long in the future. Or this lab was crazy. I just need to replace it because it ended up taking 4 days for us to get through it. Or, these notes, wow, I've got to trim them down because that took too long too. Or maybe for these notes next year, I'll have them watch the video for homework, the lecture video. If you have It's Not Rocket Science resources, all of those are available to you and included. And they're just going to take the notes at home so we have more time in class. But now is the time you make those notes, because come next year, when it's April and you're teaching evolution, you're not going to remember what didn't go well. So now is the time to write it out. And the last kind of bonus tip I'll say about this is sometimes I think we spend a lot of time writing lesson plans and unit plans for the sake of our bosses who require us to give those to them, but they're not actually written in a way that's helpful for us. Write submit what you got to submit for the sake of appeasing the man, if you will, or, your boss. Y'all know what I'm saying. But for your own sake, just write things out how it makes sense for you. For me, that was like a paper planner and sticking Post-it notes on it and then referring back to that next year. I don't know what that's going to look like for you, but give yourself the freedom to write out your unit plans and your lesson plans and your schedule for the week in a way that's really usable for you in your classroom. Okay, so if you too are struggling with keeping up with your lesson plans and all those other tasks that are on your plate, first and foremost, I recommend batching. Feel free to outsource that. Reach out to me if you have questions about how It's Not Rocket Science can help you with that. Second is overplan. Third is rhythms and routines. Fourth is pace. That rhythms and routines and pace is going to reclaim some time for you in class so you can get through more in your class period. 5 is margin. Build in margin in your week so you have a time built in to make up these tasks that get kind of shuffled or are overflow tasks. And then 6, reflect immediately for future success. So your take-home challenge today, what you can do right now is start reflecting. You can also consider batching, and maybe that looks like outsourcing. Maybe that looks like blocking off time this summer to batch. Maybe all you're going to do right now is block off some margin for these last few weeks of school and test out what that could look like and helping you keep up with your lesson planning and other teacher tasks. But those are the things I want you to pick from today to get started. And do some of this work now to serve future you next school year. Any links I mentioned can be found in the show notes at itsnotrocketscienceclassroom.com/episode 233. And this is your last chance to apply to be a guest on the Secondary Science Simplified podcast this year. The link will be in the show notes. It's bit.ly/SSSguest. And I'll be reviewing those applications over the next week or two and reaching out to everyone who applied. And I cannot wait to have you on the podcast. If that's something you're interested in doing, I would love to have you on.
All right, teacher friends, that wraps up today's episode. If you're looking for an easy way to start simplifying your life as a secondary science teacher, head to itsnotrocketscienceclassroom.com/challenge to grab your classroom reset challenge. And guess what? It's totally free. Thanks so much for tuning in, and I'll see you here next week. Until then, I'll be rooting for you, teacher friend.